The Academy of Combat Evolution prided itself on precision. Nothing about the entrance process was left to chance. Every new cadet was measured, cataloged, tested, and assigned to a tier based on objective performance data. Strength, speed, reaction time, neural processing. No opinions, no bias, only numbers. That was why the laughter in Orientation Hall 3 felt wrong. Another human? The whisper carried easily across the tiered seating. I thought they stopped admitting them. They usually wash out during physical calibration or request transfer. The murmurs spread like ripples in still water. At the center of the room stood Cadet Mira Halden, the newest transfer from Earth. She stood quietly while the orientation officer finalized her file. Standard Academy uniform, dark gray, fitted, no armor plating, no visible augmentations. Her build was lean, not bulky, compact muscle rather than imposing mass. Her hair, dark blonde, was tied loosely at the back, a few strands escaping around her face. She wasn't staring at the other cadets. She was watching the machines. That alone made the officer pause. Most new transfers looked around nervously, or defensively, or with open curiosity. Myra's gaze was focused, analytical, like an engineer studying structural tolerances. Cadet Halden, the officer said, step forward for baseline assessment. She did, calmly, no hesitation. The orientation hall was dominated by a series of test stations arranged in a semicircle. Reaction grids, neural scanners, kinetic measurement rakes. And at the center, the most intimidating of them all, stood the force calibration machine. It was massive, 3 meters tall, reinforced alloy frame, layered with sensor arrays and shock absorption plates. It measured applied physical force under controlled conditions. Most cadets struggled to push it past mid-tier readings. Some couldn't move it at all, and that was fine. It was designed for extremes. The officer tapped the console. Baseline strength evaluation, he announced. Cadet Halden will apply force to the calibration plate. A Nethrix cadet leaned toward a Talm beside him. Humans barely register on this, he muttered. Maybe she'll reach training minimum, the Talm replied dryly. Mira didn't react. She stepped onto the testing platform. The officer explained the procedure. You will place both hands on the plate. Apply forward force gradually until the system stabilizes a reading. She nodded once. Understood. The officer hesitated. Cadet, he added, do not attempt sudden exertion. The machine is calibrated for incremental load. I won't, she said. The officer activated the sensors. The hall dimmed slightly as the machine came online. Holographic readouts flickered above it. Mira approached the plate. She placed her palms against the reinforced surface. Cold metal. Solid. Unyielding. The laughter from the seating tiers hadn't stopped entirely. A Kravox cadet whispered loudly enough to be heard. But she doesn't even move the indicator. Mira exhaled slowly. Then she pushed. Not violently. Not explosively. Just steadily. The machine hummed. Numbers appeared. Baseline reading. Low. As expected. A few cadets snickered. Typical. Then the numbers kept rising. The officer frowned slightly. Cadet, maintain consistent pressure. I am, Mira replied. The machine's hum deepened. Indicators climbed past the expected human range. Past minimum training thresholds. Into mid-tier predator benchmarks. The laughter stopped. Mira didn't change her posture. She wasn't straining visibly. Her breathing remained controlled. She simply kept pushing. The calibration plate shifted slightly within its housing. A warning tone sounded. The officer's eyes widened. Cadet, reduce force, he said quickly. I'm not increasing, she replied calmly. That was the problem. She wasn't increasing. She wasn't even exerting fully. She was just holding, and the machine's sensors were still climbing. High-tier range. The readouts flickered between yellow and red. Impossible, someone whispered. A Talm cadet leaned forward. She's not braced, he said. Her stance isn't optimized. Which meant she wasn't using maximum leverage. Which meant this wasn't her limit. The officer reached for the console. Cadet Halden, disengage immediately. Mira released pressure. The numbers froze. Then stabilized. The final reading hovered far beyond typical baseline. The hall was silent. The officer stared at the data. Cadet, he said slowly. Were you exerting maximum force? Mira shook her head. No. A wave of unease passed through the room. Then why did the machine approach overload thresholds? He asked. She hesitated. Because she knew the answer. But she also knew how it would sound. I didn't realize how much resistance it had, she said honestly. The officer blinked. You misjudged the calibration load? Yes. A Kravox cadet muttered under his breath. That's ridiculous. The officer cleared his throat. Very well, he said. We will proceed to dynamic force calibration. That test required a single controlled strike rather than sustained pressure. He gestured toward the plate. One strike, he instructed. Moderate force only. Mira looked at the machine again. Its alloy frame. The sensor clusters. The way the calibration plate flexed slightly within its mounts. She frowned. Is this reinforced for high-gravity species? She asked. Yes, the officer said. It has withstood full-force impacts from Taln and Varkesh cadets. That answer reassured him. It did not reassure her. All right, she said quietly. She stepped back, raised her fist. The hall held its breath. A few cadets leaned forward eagerly, expecting a modest reading, a minor improvement over baseline. Mira didn't swing wildly. She didn't shout. She simply drove her fist forward with clean, efficient mechanics. The strike landed. There was a sound. Not the expected deep metallic impact. Something sharper. A cracking vibration that traveled through the machine's frame. The readout spiked instantly into red, then vanished. The calibration plate buckled inward. The reinforced alloy mounts snapped with a violent metallic shriek. The entire machine lurched backward, structural braces failing under the sudden stress. And then, the central support column split with a deafening crack. The force calibration machine collapsed. Silence detonated across the hall. Mira stood frozen, fist still extended, eyes wide. Oh, she whispered. Behind her, 30 cadets stared in absolute disbelief at the shattered remains of a device designed to measure, not fail under, extreme force. And the Academy's entrance exam system had just been broken by a single human strike. The first sound after the machine collapsed was not shouting. It was the system alarm. A low, pulsing tone rolled through Orientation Hall 3 as emergency protocols activated automatically. Red indicator lights ignited along the walls, and a containment field shimmered briefly around the destroyed testing platform. Cadets did not move. They simply stared. At the shattered force calibration machine. At the buckled alloy plate. At the fractured central support column. Metal warped like soft clay where the strike had landed. And at the human standing in front of it. Mira Halden lowered her fist slowly. Her expression was not triumphant. It was concerned. Oh, she repeated quietly. That wasn't supposed to happen. The orientation officer snapped out of his shock first. Cadet, step back, he said quickly. She did immediately. 2 paces. Hands open. Non-threatening posture. Security doors at the back of the hall slid open as emergency response teams rushed in. Instructors, engineers, and 2 medical drones hovering low to scan for injuries. No one checked Mira first. They checked the machine. Because that was what made the situation so disturbing. The force calibration machine was not meant to fail. It had endured decades of use, including full-force impacts from some of the most physically powerful species in the Academy. It wasn't just damaged. It was structurally compromised. Chief Engineer Trelvac knelt beside the wreckage, running diagnostic tools over the fracture points. This is not sensor overload, he muttered. He tapped the warped metal. This is material failure. The orientation officer approached carefully. Are you saying the machine was defective? Trelvac shook his head sharply. No. He pointed at the impact zone. The alloy did not fail randomly. It exceeded its stress tolerance in a single impulse. The officer swallowed. You're telling me she hit it hard enough to exceed the maximum load rating? Trelvac didn't answer immediately, because the data streaming across his tablet was worse than that. He turned the display toward the officer. The numbers glowed red. Not just exceeded, he said quietly. Overwhelmed. The hall fell deeper into silence. Mira stepped forward hesitantly. Is it reparable? She asked. The engineer looked up at her. For the first time, his expression wasn't annoyed. It was cautious. Cadet, he said slowly. Do you know what that machine is designed to measure? Force output, she said. Yes. He paused. It is not designed to break under measured force. Myra's shoulders lowered slightly. I didn't mean to. We know, the officer said quickly. Then why did it fail? She asked. That was the question no one wanted to answer yet. Because the answer wasn't mechanical. It was biological. An instructor at the back of the hall spoke quietly. Because she didn't hit it the way the system expects. All eyes turned. It was Instructor Kale Ron, a veteran combat physiology analyst. He stepped forward slowly. Every species trained here delivers force in predictable patterns, he explained. Mass distribution, skeletal leverage, neural impulse timing. He looked at Mira. Humans do not. The cadets shifted uneasily. Kale Ron activated a projection. A holographic replay of the strike appeared above the shattered machine. Frame by frame. Myra's stance. Her weight shift. The rotation of her torso. The alignment of shoulder, elbow, wrist. Observe, Kale Ron said. She did not rely on mass. The projection zoomed in on her pivot. She converted rotational momentum into concentrated impact. Another frame. The instant of contact. She did not spread force across the plate. He highlighted a tiny impact point. She focused it. The cadets leaned forward. Because that was the terrifying part. She hadn't hit the machine like a heavy-world brute. She had hit it like a precision weapon. Kale Ron turned back to the officer. The system was calibrated for distributed load, he said. Not localized structural breach. The officer felt his throat tighten. You're saying the machine failed because it didn't anticipate her strike pattern? Yes. And she did this accidentally. Kale Ron nodded once. Correct. A Kravox cadet spoke hesitantly from the seething tears. If she had intended to break it. No one answered. Because they didn't want to imagine the outcome. The emergency containment field disengaged once engineers confirmed the structure was stable enough not to collapse further. Mira was escorted to a secondary evaluation room. Not detained. Escorted. That distinction mattered. She sat quietly at a reinforced table while 3 instructors reviewed her file. Instructor Kale Ron, the orientation officer, and Commander Velruin, head of Academy intake protocols. Velruin studied her carefully. Cadet Halden, he said, did you receive specialized combat training on Earth? Yes, she replied. Military? No. The instructors exchanged looks. Then explain your force mechanics, Velruin said. Mira hesitated. Basic biomechanics training, she said. Martial arts. Physical conditioning. Velruin frowned. That level of output is not basic. She shook her head. It is where I come from. The room went very still. Kale Ron leaned forward. Clarify. Mira exhaled slowly. Earth has higher sustained gravity than most Academy worlds, she said. We grow up moving under constant load. Our muscles, bones, and connective tissues adapt. She tapped the table lightly. Force production becomes efficient by necessity. Velruin's gaze sharpened. You're saying this is not exceptional for your species. Mira met his eyes. No. That single word changed everything. The orientation officer swallowed. How many humans could replicate that strike? Mira thought about it. Most physically trained adults, she said honestly. And untrained. She hesitated. Less precise, she admitted. But still strong enough to damage equipment not designed for human biomechanics. Velruin leaned back slowly. He was not thinking about the broken machine anymore. He was thinking about the Academy itself. Its infrastructure. Its assumptions. Its classification systems. All this time, he murmured, we measured human capability using non-human models. Kale Ron nodded grimly. We underestimated their baseline. The officer looked at Mira again. You weren't trying to impress anyone, he said. No, she replied. You weren't even exerting maximum force. No. Then why strike at all? Mira answered quietly. Because that was the instruction. The simplicity of that answer carried more weight than any data report. She had followed directions. And in doing so, she had revealed a flaw in the Academy's understanding. Velruin stood. Cadet Halden, he said, you are not being penalized. Relief flickered briefly in her eyes. However, he continued, your evaluation category will require revision. She tilted her head. What kind of revision? Velruin allowed himself a faint, humorless smile. We must create one. Because there was no existing category for what she represented. Not brute strength. Not heavy world mass. Not predator dominance. Something else. Something quieter. More dangerous. Baseline human efficiency. Later that day, Orientation Hall 3 reopened. The shattered machine had been removed. In its place stood a reinforced prototype calibration unit. Thicker alloy, redesigned sensor distribution. A new label glowed above it. Human-compatible force testing system.